Hello there folks, my name is Spooks and welcome back to another episode of Box Office Chat. This is the show where I break down the top 5 domestic box office results, see where each movie landed, and see how well each movie did. So let's get started. Number 5 was Bullet Train, making $2.5 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $96 million and a worldwide total of $222 million. So not only did this film had its best hold in its entire theatrical run, just dipping 23% from last weekend, which is very solid, but it's also just inches away from surpassing the $100 million milestone domestically, which, given where it's at, obviously I think it's safe to say it's going to surpass that milestone for sure. I don't think it's going to surpass the $300 million milestone worldwide, considering it is losing steam a bit, both internationally and domestically right now, but otherwise this film had such a fantastic run theatrically. Word of mouth really helped this movie out. It had strong legs and it just became one of the bigger hits of the year for not just Sony, but for the type of movie it is that I've mentioned plenty of times discussing this movie. The fact that it is an R-rated violent action comedy, and the fact that it was able to be as successful as it was is quite impressive. However, I'm not sure if we will be able to see it get to the $100 million milestone domestically on this show, as this it seems ever so likely that this will be one of, if not the last time, it is in the top 5 domestic box office results. But as I said, prior to this, this movie had such a fantastic run at the box office that this doesn't really amount to anything, and the fact that it's leaving the top 5 domestic box office results as big of a success as it is just shows how successful it was. It had a very solid run for it being pretty much the only last major summer blockbuster to come out in the past few months. Really helped it out as well, and once again, word of mouth really helped this movie out. Clearly audiences like this a lot more than the critics did. But yeah, with it about to leave the top 5, I bid thee farewell and say job well done, as it was a pretty solid hit at the box office. Good job, Bullet Train. Number 4 was See How They Run, opening with $3 million domestically this weekend and $7 million worldwide. So as I mentioned last weekend, I wasn't really expecting much for this movie. The lack of marketing or any real buzz I saw for the film didn't really help with predictions for the film. I thought it wasn't really going to do well, and it didn't really. While there is no reported budget that I'm able to find, I do think this is a pretty low opening regardless, because once again, they just didn't promote the movie all that well. I barely saw any sort of advertising for it, and that caused the movie to fly under the radar for many people. Didn't hear a lot of conversations from people via the internet or in person talking about if they were going to see this movie, and that's clearly what hurt it. I'm curious to see if it will have strong legs. We are still in I won't say a slump, but a rough patch. We do seem to be on the increase with new movies and their openings. More on that later, but I'm curious to see if this movie will hold in any particular way, because of, once again, if word of mouth will really help it out, as not too many people were aware of this movie. Hopefully it somehow bounces back from this opening weekend, but I don't have too many expectations for that. So yeah, despite entering the top 5, which honestly kind of impressed me, I'm not expecting much for See How They Run in the long run. Number 3 was Pearl, opening with $3.1 million this weekend domestically, and that total stays the same worldwide as it hasn't been released in any international countries yet. So while this was still a bit lower than what X opened to earlier this year, that had around 4 million opening weekend, and this obviously had around a 3 million opening weekend, this was still a pretty solid opening weekend for this movie, given the fact that I didn't see any marketing or advertising for it whatsoever, barely saw a commercial for it or even heard anyone talk about it via the internet or in person, as unlike something like See How They Run, where you can tell it definitely has a bigger budget for sure. This movie, while it hasn't been officially confirmed, it has been reported that the film costed around only $1 million. And hey, it has already tripled that budget back. So pretty much any more money it makes in the long run is pretty much just extra change. This movie is going to profit regardless of how well it does in the coming weeks. It could plummet like 76% next weekend and it would still be profitable. That was honestly a pretty smart move from A24, especially when they're building this as their new horror franchise, as I believe the day before or on the day of Pearl's release, it was announced that a third film in this X horror franchise, Maxine, with 3 X's in the title for those who are curious, is set to be released in theaters very soon. So overall, regardless that it opened a little bit lower than X, this film is a very profitable movie, already a hugely successful movie considering the budget, and it's just gonna keep on profiting in the coming weeks, especially with October around the corner. And I feel like the buzz and the word of mouth is probably gonna help it out, as well, it's a new horror film in October, and on top of that, it's a very particular horror film released in October, so you know people are probably going to get interested in that to get into the spirit of Halloween. So yeah, overall, Pearl is in good hands right now. We'll see how well it does in the coming weeks. Again, maybe it could plummet, and that might cause problems, but as far as right now, and maybe even in the long run for sure, this movie is already and going to be a hugely successful movie considering its budget. Good job. Number 2 was Barbarian, making $6.5 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $21 million and a worldwide total of $22 million. So last weekend, after it overperformed, I had skepticisms on where it would go from there on forward, as it is very typical for horror films to have pretty solid opening weekends, but then plummet in their second weekend and just fall into obscurity. And I was kind of feeling it with this movie, as while it did have a pretty solid opening weekend and reviews were phenomenal, audiences were not too kind with it. They gave it a C+ on Cinema Score, which is a bad sign for any movie, really, if you want to resonate with your audiences. But clearly I was wrong, as it had a spectacular second weekend hold of just 38% from last weekend, which is not only great for a horror film, it's great for this type of horror film, because let me tell you folks, this movie is, I haven't seen it, but from what I've heard, it is weird, it is messed up in all of the right places, and it is definitely something that'll probably keep you up at night. But yeah, to see this type of horror film be as successful as it is quite fascinating and honestly really impressive, as I even before its opening weekend, I had my doubts about it. If I thought it was going to play out similar to something like The Invitation, but it is clearly doing something here and resonating well with audiences for sure. And as successful as it is, for sure, it is already doubled its budget. I can't really get a good read on this. Some people say the movie costed $4 million, others say it costed $10.5 million, but regardless, it has already made its budget back and doubled it for sure, even if one of those outcomes were the likely outcome, because yeah, thanks to its cheap budget, it is definitely going to become profitable. And just like Pearl, given that October is on the horizon, I feel like due to the nature of this movie, word of mouth is only going to help it out from here on forward for sure. So yeah, Barbarian is starting to become kind of the sleeper hit for Fox Searchlight at a time where they might need one, as well. See How They Run didn't really do well, but yeah, I'm impressed. Good job, Barbarian. You're becoming quite the sleeper hit in this box office drought of sorts. And finally, let's end the video off with the number one movie of the weekend, which was The Woman King, opening with $19 million this weekend domestically, and that total stays the same worldwide as it has yet to be released in any international countries. And regardless of that, and the fact that the movie costed $50 million to make, this is honestly a pretty solid opening weekend. I had my positives with this movie when discussing it last weekend. I felt that while it wasn't going to have a huge blockbuster opening weekend type of thing, I did think its opening weekend could impress, and this certainly did impress as it exceeded many of the expectations for it and seems to be resonating very well with audiences, as this is the second film this year to receive the coveted A+ cinema score, only second to Top Gun Maverick, and we all know how well that movie did. And while I'm not saying that this movie is going to reach those levels, because clearly it's not. I think this movie is going to become a pretty decent hit at the box office, similar to something like Where the Crawdads Sings, or if the A+ cinema score is really as special as it is, maybe even Bullet Train, because this is definitely something special we're seeing here. The fact that it is one of two movies this year to receive that rating on CinemaScore is quite impressive, and there are also a lot of factors that helped it out this weekend. The fact that reviews were amazing, the fact that the marketing was really solid, and despite it being one of 3 new movies hitting theaters, it was really the only one that people were interested or had some curiosity in going to check out. And I think word of mouth is really going to help this movie out. I think we're going to see some very strong holds that push it to being, once again, a big hit for Sony. Now, obviously, it does have one bump in the road, and like I said earlier, it is the fact that the movie costed $50 million. It's definitely going to need a lot of help, and is certainly going to need to release in some international countries. But when it eventually does, I'm sure it will be able to help out the totals there, get it to a doubling point, and I still think that with the word of mouth and how positive the reception for this movie has been, I think it's definitely got a shot at reaching that doubling point for sure. So yeah, overall, I have very high hopes for The Woman King and where it's headed. This opening weekend was great. Reviews were great. Audience reactions are great. I'm very positive towards this movie, and I look forward to seeing where it goes from here. And those were the top 5 domestic box office results for this weekend, but we're not quite done yet, as we've got another week ahead of us and new movies hitting theaters. And while we have 2 new movies hitting theaters this weekend, one of them is basically just the re-release of Avatar, and I don't really think it's going to amount to anything, but the other is Don't Worry, Darling. Oh boy, folks, do we have... We have the controversial movie, folks. I bet you weren't expecting this to be one of the most controversial films of the year, yet here we are. Basically, in the past couple months, you could not go anywhere without hearing any sort of drama about this movie. The fact that it is the second to last release from Warner Brothers, because they have been so poorly managed this year that they have pretty much ran out of money to release any other movies this year. So good job, David Zaslav. And the other is just all the controversy going on with the cast. There's too much into that can of worms to fill it in just this portion of the video. So if you want to learn more, do your research, I guess. But yeah, and the fact that reviews were also pretty bad. Some of them are mixed, but the majority of them are leaning towards negative on this movie. There's a lot of things that are definitely not working to this movie's favor. However, I do think this movie has a shot of overperforming because of the controversies. Let me explain, folks. But prior to this movie's release, I barely heard anyone talking about it. It definitely was promoted, and the marketing prior to the controversy and even now has been pretty good. I've been seeing a lot of promotion for it, a lot of ads for sure. But in regards to buzz, I just wasn't seeing it, so I was kind of conflicted on where this movie would head. But thanks to all the drama, I think this movie's buzz just increased tenfold. I could not go anywhere in the past couple weeks without hearing someone talk about this movie, the cast, Warner Brothers, you name it. And I've heard from so many people via the internet or even in person say, look, I'm going to see this movie because I want to know where all this craziness has led to. And apparently there were also some early access showings in select IMAX theaters that were also pretty successful. They haven't released those numbers yet, but I heard that plenty of them were nearly sold out. But yeah, overall, I can see this movie kind of exceeding expectations. It is definitely going to be an interesting movie to see play out this weekend. Will the controversy and all the buzz surrounding it pay off, or will it fall flat on its face? I am not sure, but I am eagerly looking forward to see how it does. So we shall see how well this movie does, as well as the rest of the movies that land in the top 5 on the next Box Office Chat. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Box Office Chat. What did you all think of the results? Were you satisfied? Unsatisfied? Comment down below and let me know. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like this channel, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on all the social media links right there. And until next time, everyone, stay sharp.